Shabbat Shalom. I'm Susan Moses-Zirkes, and as some of you well know, I am not any sort of Torah scholar. I have this honor today because I work at a school and I was on spring break, and that suddenly involved going nowhere and making really no plans whatsoever. And so I texted Frances Fisher and I said, hey, is there anything I can do to be helpful? And she wrote back right away and said, yes, do you want to do a D'var Torah? It's really hard, I find, to say no to Frances. So here I am. I picked April 4th, a convenient date for me, and it wasn't until a few days later, actually, that I sat down and actually read Parshat Tzav. It's a lot of details, Parshat Tzav. God speaks to Moses and lays out like an IRS manual's worth of commands for Aaron and his sons. How to do a burnt offering, a sin offering, a meal offering, a guilt offering, a Thanksgiving offering, what the Cohen's garments should be made of, when he should change them, what can be eaten, what should never, ever, under any circumstances be touched, what can be mixed with oil, what must be unleavened, how to dispose of the ashes after a sacrifice. It was, in all honesty, really hard for me to get excited about the details of a system that we left behind thousands of years ago. There were only a couple of things that stood out to me. The first one was actually near the end of the Parsha. I think it's chapter 8, line 35. Moses is anointing Aaron and his sons, getting them ready to be priests. And the very last command that they have to follow is to, quote, stay day and night at the entrance to the Ohel Moed for 7 days. You shall observe the Lord's command so that you will not die. Really? I had absolutely no idea that God gives shelter-in-place orders. And this one doesn't even seem to have any exceptions for walking the dog or making a target run. The second detail that stood out to me, in more seriousness, was earlier in the Parsha, chapter 6, line 6, says that an Eish Tamid, an eternal fire, shall burn on the altar where the sacrifices are going to be happening. It shall burn on the altar and not go out. The Eish Tamid, I read in one commentary, was a fire that burned for 889 years until the destruction of the temple. That is a lot of fire. I get that our ancestors were not concerned about carbon emissions or climate change, but it's still not a small request that God is making, either in terms of human vigilance or just plain raw materials. I mean, we have a fireplace in our den. I love it, but usually somewhere in the second Netflix episode, I am really done with getting up and fussing with the logs and adding more wood and going out to the garage to get more, and I'm really pretty happy to let the fire go out. But not this one. The Kohanim were very clearly commanded to keep that fire burning forever, without any real explanation as to why that might be important. Thinking about fire can lead you in all sorts of directions, so I wasn't really surprised that there's a fair amount of commentary online about the Eish Tamid. I read that the fire was crucial because it created a conduit, a place for the heavenly fire from God to descend, where it would meet up with the human-created fire and, in fact, keep a perpetually open portal between the Israelites and God and ensure that the sacrifices would be acceptable. I read another commentator saying, well, it's actually more like a symbol of God's presence forever among the Israelites. And a Hasidic source suggested that think of it more like a metaphor for the divine spark in each of us that we have to tend in order to make sure that it doesn't go out. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. There we go. I found all of that pretty interesting. But what I personally kept coming back to was the sheer amount of vigilance that this command would require. I mean, I don't know how steady the flow of sacrificing was, but I'm picturing that there would have been plenty of downtime when nothing was being burned. And yet, during all of those times, there'd still have to be Kohanim watching the fire, paying attention to the materials for the fire, cooperating with other Kohanim, planning to overcome any potential obstacles that might be in the near future. I mean, we were still wandering through the wilderness at this point, so there would have been a ton of unknowns, like how much wood will we be able to collect during this next leg of the journey? How much should we stock up on to be ready? Maybe do I need to pull a double shift watching the fire because the next Cohen coming up isn't our most reliable? I've been an elementary school psychologist for more than 20 years, so I've had plenty of time to think about attention and vigilance. Difficulties in this area, sustaining attention, paying attention to important details, these are among my most common referrals. I've watched these referrals skyrocket over the past few years as babies, toddlers, older children, and their parents are spending ever more and more time on electronic devices. During these past few weeks, innumerable losses, fears, difficulties have been thrust upon us, and we know that there's many more to come. One of the many challenges in this situation is the quickly shifting demand for our own vigilance. For our own good, the good of our neighbors, community, family, general public, we are being asked to just set aside so many of the things that we normally pay very careful attention to. Box scores, jobs, commute times, career paths, travel plans, hairstyles, tryouts for plays, traveling teams, Girl Scout cookies, the S&P 500 value. At the same time, we must now become exceptionally vigilant about details that most of us have never paid any attention to whatsoever. How many seconds do we actually wash our hands for? How many feet are there between us and the next customer in line? Whether that tickle in the back of my throat is getting slightly better or possibly a teeny bit worse. Whether virus may be transmitted via aerosol or only droplets. Whether our microphones are on mute while our kid is having a tantrum during the Zoom call. We have to do this drastic shift in our vigilance while most of us are dramatically increasing the amount of time that we're spending on the very electronic devices we have that tend to decrease our capacity for attention. And we have to do this shift without becoming hypervigilant or succumbing to our own or our communal anxiety. Imagining the Kohanim tending the Eish Tamid actually gave me some comfort. It suggests to me that we as a people have some conceptual frameworks for vigilance and that we've had a lot of practice with vigilance over the centuries. It also reminds me that vigilance is both an individual and a communal responsibility, and we're not alone. As conservative Jews in particular, we know that it's possible to pay attention to the details while always keeping the big picture in mind. And we'll be getting some extra practice this week as we're scrubbing and rearranging cabinets and searching for chametz while simultaneously taking extra care of ourselves and our families and our community, and along the way reinventing what it means to invite all who are in need to join us for Seder. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.